mean to trust somebody, I just like sometimes I get so bogged down by this fact in education that I need to talk about it, and that's what I'm here. I realize that I started in like the middle of a thought there, so that's actually on me. I apologize. I'll try to give like more context, but at this point, you guys know what you signed up for, and you know what you clicked on. And if you don't, then welcome to Kassick's Corner, the part of the internet where I just want to create like this little space for me to vent for one, but also for you to feel some safety in venting and ranting about the triumphs and tribulations of teaching. So, as we jump into it today, we are going to talk about like trust, and in the education system, we're going to talk about like teachers needing trust. We're going to talk about trust within education and just like kind of the ramifications of it. There's a few. I do have some notes, which is, like I said, I'm growing. I'm getting so much better. I do have some notes on what I want to talk about, but with that, it's also just going to be like a lot of like my crazy thoughts kind of going into it. So this might end up being two parts because I feel like the way that I want to talk about this, I don't know if I'll get there. So, and I might just go a bunch of different places and I'll get like 45 minutes in, as you guys know, and I just won't have talked about anything. And then I need to start all over. So we're just gonna start. So as I was saying before, it's like, what is trust, right? And I think about that word trust in a bunch of different ways. The first one being, it's like you have this sense of responsibility that you're putting into someone, whether it's a friend, colleague, supervisor, someone you work with, someone that works underneath you, anything like that, right? You have this sense of responsibility you're instilling in somebody, and then you're trusting them to maintain that responsibility. Whether it's like a secret you're trusting with a friend, whether it's like a family member thing, whether it's like a responsibility you're doing at work, any sort of thing like that. A responsibility that you're instilling in somebody is the method you use to like trust them, right? And that's kind of like what I'm going to base it off. I have not spent any time thinking about that, so I was low-key just rambling. But I do want you to believe like what you think about trust is true, because I think everyone kind of has that like similar ability to understand what trust is and what it does for you, right? I think I think a lot of things that trust does is it like inspires safety, right? Like that's the whole reason that like this exists and like I existed in the way that I was. It's because like, students and people hopefully trust me to like give them this information and provide a space for them, right? It's like that trusted adult space. It's that trusted space that you're creating in a classroom in education that I think is a really big deal. So there's a few angles like I was talking about that this kind of goes into, and one of them is like a political angle. I'm not going to get too far into that, probably one, because like I don't have a lot of the research, and I don't really appreciate when people go on the internet and like start yapping about politics without any sort of like research being done. Granted, I know like some things just like having been around and following what I follow, like I know some stuff, right? But I don't know all of the inner workings of it, and that's my own downfall, right? Like I'm working on that. But the idea is I'm not going to come up here and like state all my opinions without any sort of like factual evidence. I am going to state some opinions because this is my podcast. You guys, like I said, if you've been here, you understand what I'm saying when I say that. So I will like talk about some of those things and like my opinions on it and where we're at currently. And, I'm not going to get too far into like what it means and what that works for, because of the fact that, like I said, like I feel like I don't want to be the only voice in that conversation, just because of the fact that like I don't know. I don't have all the answers. All my answers come from personal experience, and that's hardly enough anymore. You know what I mean? The second angle is kind of like education in general, like the institutional angles. And then I want to talk about like my personal issues that I've had with like trust in education and kind of how it kind of led to me doing some things at a previous position of mine, and why that kind of led to me quitting in some ways. It's not the story necessarily of like why wait, we've been trying to get to that point for a long time, right? I feel like I'm just like leaving little breadcrumbs that like eventually when I talk about it, I'll just be like, hey, go watch the rest of my podcast, you piece it together and you tell me what you find. Because at this point it's like I've already talked about all the little pieces. It's just about putting them all together in like one podcast episode, right? So anyway, the part three of this is like my personal angle on it, and that's kind of always how I like to do it, because like I said, this is Kassick Corner for a reason. Like it is unfortunately about me. Like I'm the star. And I feel like if I don't go through and talk about how it has affected me personally, then everything I've said before that is kind of a waste of time, right? So as we get into it right now in time, and I don't know where we're going to be at in the future or when this episode comes out or when you listen to this episode, like I'm not a fortune teller in that capacity. Wish I was. Actually, that's too much of a burden. I don't want to do that. But I don't know when you will be listening to this or when it will necessarily reach the audience it needs to. So I don't know what the state of the world will look like when that sort of happens. But as of right now, there is a president in charge that's trying to take the the Department of Education and dismantle it, right? Like that's been a goal of that political party, the conservative political party, for a long time. I don't know why I was skirting around saying that. Like I'm going to create some sort of fucking controversy by bringing it up and talking about my opinion. I'm a teacher. At this point, if y'all don't know where my political leanings are, then like, welcome. Here we are. At this point in time, we have somebody that's trying to dismantle the Department of Education, right? And I talk about this a lot as a teacher. Like it's the one thing that I feel like I have knowledge about, and the one of the many reasons that I did not vote for that candidate in the past elections. And coming from my professional knowledge, like having been a teacher for the past 10 years, having a master's degree in education, having been through all of these things, like I do have some sort of grounding there to say that this is not a good idea, right? And one of the big arguments is like, oh, states provide most of the funding anyway, so what's the point? And I will give you that, right? Like states do provide an ample amount of funding for schools. Like I think it's like 90% or something. Like I said, don't check me on any of the facts, okay? But in dismantling the Department of Education, the goal is to bring the power back to the states, right? Like that's kind of the main prerogative of this administration is saying, hey, like we want to limit the federal powers and we want to give everything back to the states, right? And in doing that, and specifically to education, yeah, sure, the funding obviously comes from the state. Like every school follows usually the state standards. There aren't like a lot of national standards outside of like Common Core, but schools choose to adopt those and states choose to adopt those based on their own departments of education, based on their own like educational needs, right? So as far as the state level goes, like there's already a lot of power that rests in the states and a lot of funding that rests in the states. And when people talk about education, the biggest thing they like to talk about and focus on is funding, which honestly, like, as they should, because funding is like a huge issue across the board, whether we're talking about like access to curriculum for students, whether we're talking about like access to a school building, right? Like as far as transportation goes, and as far as paying teachers, like that's a huge thing with funding, right? There's a million different things that like funding could mean. And I understand why we're focusing on that, right? So in saying, hey, let's dismantle the Department of Education, we are then saying like, hey, the state's funding covers most of it anyway, right? Keyword there is most. It does not cover all of the funding, and this is where like the issues with dismantling that comes from, right? When we talk about dismantling a federal protection, we're talking about this idea of equity, equality, and like justice throughout the entire system, right? So when we're talking about federal things, right? I work currently in special education, and the IDEA Act, the Disabilities Act, that kind of basically says like, hey, if you have a learning disability, you are federally protected to receive a program that helps you access the general curriculum, okay? And that is a federally protected thing. Every school follows that. Every school does it. Like every school writes an IEP a little bit differently, but every school has to have a process to write IEPs because of the fact that there is federal protections. This is every public school, every charter school in the capacity that it is has to maintain that protection for students with disabilities. And this is not the same in private schools. When I was attempting to work at a couple private schools, I kind of asked them about like, oh, like how do you differentiate? Like what are, the population of students with IEPs? And they were like, we don't have any. And I was like, what the fuck? What do you mean? How do you not have any? And they're like, yeah, we just those kids don't come to school. And that's kind of a little off-putting, a lot off-putting in the fact that it's like they're kind of barring people away from education, right? And when you dismantle a federal protection like that, when you dismantle a protection at all, it limits the ability to help those people in certain states, right? So imagine, this goes through the Department of Education, is dismantled, and powers left to the states. There could be a student that grows up in a particular state, in a particular county, in a particular school district that does not, offer those IDEA services, that does not offer that IEP service, that does not pay special education teachers to deliver that service. That student is then left behind in a matter of equity, in a matter of equality and access to education. And that's the issue that I have, right? Coming from my personal experience, dismantling that federal protection allows a massive inequity to like go across the system. And given that there are already inequities based on rural communities, based on, urban populations, based on demographics in certain situations, right? There are already so many inequities in place within the education system that taking out a federal protection that says, if you are a public school, you have to do these things. The second we take that away, those inequities are going to be so much bigger. Those inequities are going to spread across the rest of the country, the rest of the state, and eventually just make education way worse than it already is, right? And that's sure disasterific. That is, catastrophic. That is me doing worst case scenario type shit. But at the same time, that is what the federal government oversight is, right? Like in 1976, I think, I pulled that date out of nowhere, when the Department of Education was created. The goal was saying, like, hey, we don't want to segregate schools. We want to make sure every student has access to an education, and we need a government entity that's going to be responsible for doing those things, right? Sure, the federal government provides about, like I said, like 10% of funding, and that funding is available for those federal protections, right? So a school will lose about 10% of its funding just based on losing that departmental entity in the federal government. So all that to say, it's a bad idea to take something that has been established, that, you know, every current teacher has been trained on, that there are these federal rights, these federal protections that students have, that all of a sudden might be taken away. Now, to play like devil's advocate a little bit here, there is a high possibility that all states, let's be really generous here and say all states will continue with these protections. Okay, so if that is the case, then okay, here we are in the state of, Texas, for example, that hey, I'm going to maintain the same federal protections, I'm going to do all the same things, and then in my brain it's like, okay, why not just keep it federal so that we can maintain the systemic approach to making sure that everyone has equal access to education? Because at the end of the day, education is a right. It is not something that people should need to work for. It is not something that should be given based on where you live. It is not something that should be given based on your race, your ethnicity, your demographic, your socioeconomic status. Everyone should be given an education. Education is a right, right? And you can even, to play devil's advocate even further, like you can play that back to the founding fathers and like what they wanted: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? The pursuit of happiness is you get to do that in your own capacity. And how can you possibly have any sort of pursuit to happiness if you do not have an education? Okay. And the foundations of democracy in itself are relying on an educated system of people that are being able to vote and have a say in what happens to their government, right? All of that democratic features, all of the things that America is founded upon the process of an education. So if we decide suddenly to go in and take that away and pull it out and say, hey, good luck Texas, good luck Florida, good luck California, good luck all of this, right? The idea here is that that's not the best way to do things, right? Because every state is then going to be different, and everything is going to be a little bit different that way. And clearly, you can tell that I'm getting a little antsy and anxious and opinionated about this because of the fact I'm talking so fast. You can probably hear it. You're probably like, slow down, bro. And I just wish that people understood what it meant to create this baseline of education. Education truly is the foundation of an effective democracy. And the second we take that away, we're losing democracy, right? And I wish that the people who put this administration in power realize that. Not only are they doing it here, they're also doing it in a bunch of different capacities. And like I said, we're not going to get into that piece, but I did want to talk about this foundation of this is where we have an issue, right, in education for sure. And it comes out to that idea of trust, right? When we are a population instilling trust in something, instilling trust in a department, instilling trust in what the country is trying to do, instilling trust in our teachers and our education systems, is we need to make sure that we listen to them, right? Politically, currently, there is nobody in charge in this current administration. Even in the previous administration, there were opportunities for more people to be in charge, but unfortunately, there is not a trusted person in education that is running things, right? And nobody's listening to teachers on the political thing, in the political realm. Nobody is going to teachers and saying, hey, like, what policy should we put in place? Like, how do we help teachers? Like, nobody fucking asks teachers. They go and they ask politicians. They go and they ask lobbyists. They go and they ask people who just aren't in that same realm. They go ask, state directors, state board members who are removed from education because they're in it for the political gain. They're in it for the power of the politics, right? And nobody's sitting here and listening to the teachers because nobody trusts them, right? Politically, nobody is asking teachers, what is the thing that we need to do to make education better? They're just saying, hey, you know what? This will probably work, right? This will probably work. And it's a broken system. The system is so broken. And every time I have a conversation with this teacher, a coworker, a teacher from a different building, a teacher from a different school, a different district, a different state, right? It always comes down to like the system is broken. The system is so entirely broken. It's crazy because even with the establishment of the Department of Education, however long ago, 50 years ago at this point, right? Nobody has taken that opportunity to then say like, hey, like maybe we should put someone who knows about education in charge. Like maybe we should trust a teacher, someone who has, put their life on the line for education, for the betterment of society and democracy. Like, hey, let's make them in charge. Nobody has fucking thought of that. Like, please be so for real. Like, what do you mean? And that's just on the political realm, right? Like when we get into like the institutional knowledge, right? We're talking about at an education level. We're in the state right now of banning books. We're in the state right now of parental input. And I'm not here to say that parental input is bad. I highly recommend and encourage a community of people working together to better students and to better the education system, right? But it's these parents that come in and say like, "Oh, stop teaching this book. It's not true. Stop teaching this piece of history. It's not true." You don't fucking know, right? Like they should not be allowed to have an influence on the things that teachers professionally and academically train for. And that comes down to that like institutional knowledge, right? We're talking about this idea of people are just coming into education because they feel like they can and they're not trusting the professionals in charge to do so. This is me advocating for the profession in general, right? In a million different capacities, but it's just this institutional concept of it's like, oh, they're just teachers. Like I pay their salary. Like they don't know anything. Like I'm the expert on my kid. Like all these different things. And while you may be the expert on your kid, you are not the expert on how to teach them in their certain circumstances in that certain classroom with the certain curriculum you are using. That is literally the job of the teacher. They know the standards, they know the classroom management, they know the lessons they need to get there, they know the units, they know how to guide them, they know how to differentiate, they know how to lesson plan, they know how to engage your students, they know how to create projects and assessments and all these different things. And people believe in whatever process in the institution that you're in, that they get to come in and then like say, nope, you get to do something different. And that is so fucked up that I cannot even begin to imagine. I am getting way too hyped. I think I need to take a deep breath, bro. But it's just, it comes down to this idea of trust, right? People in society generally do not trust teachers to go in and educate their children to the best way they possibly can, right? I talked about it in a previous episode, I know, where I was talking about like my book or like my reading and writing kind of stuff. I don't remember what episode it is. Like after, 12 episodes, they start blurring together a little bit. But I was talking about this idea of teachers like in the news. Every time you hear about a teacher in the news, it's something awful, right? It's something that shouldn't have happened. It's like a school shooting, heaven forbid. It's a student and teacher relationship gone wrong, right? It's a teacher that got kicked out because they posted something on social media, all of these different things. And it's never about this like positive mindset that teachers have to make a difference. It's never about the public trust in teachers. It always leads to this like public distrust of educators and academics and education in general, that like no fucking wonder that people don't trust teachers is because the narrative has been crafted so much that it says like they shouldn't. It says that they shouldn't trust teachers, right? And that is the problem where we have, right? Like I started in student teaching when I first started getting into this profession. I literally had a blog, and this is where I was going with like I talked about it in a different episode. I literally had a blog that was accentuating the positive, that was kind of going through the different pieces of what I was doing as a student teacher, as a 20-year-old student teacher in this brand new world, and saying like, hey, here's some really good stuff that I'm doing in my classroom that will alleviate the negativity and the pressure that I'm feeling from society to perform, to maintain these certain expectations that they don't believe that I can. And I think it comes down to this idea of trust, right? And that brings me down to like this administrative level, this institutional level, this more like direct level to teachers. And it comes down from the state, it comes down from the board, it comes down from admin, in the sense that it's like, you hired this person, you hired this professional with a license from your state to teach this curriculum. There are so many things getting in the way of that ability to do so, right? Like whether it's a canned curriculum that we're like handed from some sort of state member who's like, yeah, this will be the best one. Trust me, like, this is the best one to use. And it's like, bro, like, how do you even fucking know, right? or it's an administrator saying like, hey, you need to teach this certain way because it'll help us reach this certain goal. And not here to like, shit on admin forever, because I know that they're beholden to their own expectations and their own standards and their own evaluations or whatever, right? It's the system top down, right? But it's this sense of teachers are the ones that are in the trenches. Teachers are the ones that are doing the hard work. Teachers are the ones that are taking the brunt of this force from the public that allows this kind of distrust to continue and this amount of distrust to like happen in society, right? So at what point are we going to turn that around and do it to support teachers? Because if you support teachers, you're supporting students. And if you're supporting students, you're supporting the society in which they grow up. You're supporting then, a bigger thing. We're supporting the nation and the world. And I'm and I'm not being dramatic when I say that, obviously. I'm really not, because it all comes back to teachers. You know the things you know because somebody taught it to you. You are able to perform in your career because somebody taught you how to do it, right? The teaching profession is the oldest profession, and it is the one that has created the most well-being in society. And I can sit here and say that because I want to. It just comes down to that fact that I believe that within education we need to value that piece more, and the value comes with this sense of trust, because the second you're able to trust the teacher to go in and do their job, the second that they're going to feel more validated, more strong, more able and confident in doing the things they need to do for your students. And isn't that what we're all pressed about anyway, is the well-being of the kids and how they're coming up and how things are moving that way, right? I left some notes that I wanted to talk about, right? And this is coming from like my personal angle now, where it's like the way that this has worked for me is like threefold, right? And when I'm talking about this idea of trust, I think it comes from, your credentials. It comes from your context that you exist in. It comes from, you guys remember the sorry, my brain, the Kamala Harris meme where it's like, you exist in a context of all in which came before you, and like the coconuts. Do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? I miss that. Can we like take me back? What is that? Brat Summer 2024. I miss the coconut tree. I miss existing in contexts. Here we are. How did we get here? Anyway, when we're talking about trust in teachers, right? You're talking about when I first started at my last school, I was 21 years old. I had just graduated from college. I just finished student teaching. I was literally fresh out of like the educational womb, for a lack of a better word, right? Like I literally was born into this thing, and I said, hey, like I'm ready. Like show me where to go. Like sign me up, bro. I remember I got hired towards the end of the summer, or towards the middle of the summer, because the person they hired first kind of dropped out, so they kind of had to default to me. The story of my hiring is one for a little bit later. Actually, let's do it now. I was working at a tutoring center. I think I already talked about this actually on another episode, but I was working at a tutoring center, and that part of the tutoring center job was to like go around and visit with schools, advocate for the kids and like kind of what they needed. And it was towards the beginning of summer where we had a student that was working at the school I eventually got hired at. And I went to meet with the counselor, and I was like, hey, like he's a senior, like we're working on ACT, SAT prep. Like, what is something that we can do to support him here? Like, is there anything that you guys can help us with? Like, just having a conversation, advocating for the student, right? So I go and talk to the counselor. We get to talking about like, my background, where I come from. I was like, yeah, I just graduated. Like, I'm struggling to find a job, all these things. And he was like, hey, we have like an English opening. And I was like, yeah, like I applied at the job fair like a while ago, and I haven't heard anything. So I just assumed that like, I didn't look good on paper, or the interview that I did do at the job fair, like I don't come off well. Like, I don't know. My first impressions of things really don't go well for me. And I think I talked about it already, about why that might be. But, that's not for now. And when that conversation happened, I think I got a call like a week later that said like, hey, come in for an interview. Like that counselor had advocated for me to come get the job just based on like whatever vibes that he picked up from that conversation. And, that was super cool experience. I'm still forever grateful to him for doing that. And I have told him on many scenarios that, I wouldn't have had a job there and wouldn't have done all the things that I was able to do without him. So thank you. And I was still very new to the profession at that time, right? So when you go in as a new teacher, you have to do induction, which is basically training you on the job. You have that like first year teacher energy where it's just like super excited to do all these things, but not a lot of practical knowledge and actually doing them. So there's a lot of people just like watching you and helping you out and doing those things. So like right off the bat as a teacher, there's like this genuine like distrust, even though you have all the credentials, you have the license, you have the degree, like right off the bat, they're just like, yeah, you have all that, but like let's see how this goes for the next like couple years. And there's just people like constantly, checking in on you, making sure you're okay, like making sure you're following procedures, like all those different things, which I understand. It's like job training, it's whatever. But like right off the bat, right, you have that like sense of distrust. And then as I began to become the teacher that I was, I became this teacher that, kind of was defaulted as like the fun teacher. Like I was a young male teacher in a middle school, and a lot of students just gravitated towards that energy. And that is just the case that is across the board, I think, in education, where, you generally think of a teacher as someone who is a little bit disconnected from you. Like when I think about my teachers, I don't think I ever had like a teacher that I viewed as like younger and closer to like my generation and like able to like connect and relate to us. And a lot of younger teachers now are going in, and with the use of the internet and social context and all those different things, like they're able to like more closely connect to and relate to students. So when I walked in, I kind of automatically had that just as like an outlier of education, right? Like I'm a young man in education that came into a middle school and immediately was able to like bring my personality, my energy there, that was very realistic, right? So I had a lot of that, and with that came like this sense of distrust among other teachers, right? And this is also an institutional thing where there's such a big thing to be said about like teacher culture within your building, that if there's not a sense of trust and community with teachers between each other, then the vibe of the building is bad. The connections with teachers are going to be bad, which then leads to the connections with the student. Like I said, like this all comes back to like this idea of like teacher value and teacher health, where like the more we're able to do to support those two things, the better the students will be. And in this building, there was a lot of, veteran teachers. There were a lot of teachers who have been doing it for a while, just at the school I was at. And with that came the sense of like, oh, he's just the new guy. Like, of course, everyone likes him. Like, he's just this new young guy. Like, he's just a fad. Like, he'll get over it. I felt that energy probably for genuinely probably the first 3 years of my education, where teachers would look at me and like say like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. Oh, you'll get there. Or yeah, you're just a fun guy, aren't you? Like you're so fun. Like everyone loves your class. It's like bitch, like what? Like why would you look at somebody who's actively trying to do the best that they know how to do and then say shit like that, right? And this is not the case for every educational institute, right? Like I'm talking very specifically about the vibe that I was given in the situation that I was in. Right. So for the first like 2 or 3 years, there was a lot of issues there with I got my value from the students and they trusted me. Like that was very evident early on in my career that like I generated a lot of trust from the students. But when it came to like other teachers and administration, they kind of just always had like their eye on me. Like something was a little bit off. Right. And I don't know what that came from, but you feel the sense of distrust. And then I, being, the way that I am and knowing that I have a diagnosis now of autism, like I feel like that has played such a huge role in how I look back on these things, where it's like somebody displays distrust to me. And one, I want to like work to trust them. Like I want to develop that because I am a genuinely trustworthy person. But as I look back on it, it's also like, damn, what I wanted to do is I wanted to prove them so fucking wrong that I just did the exact opposite because I knew what I was doing was best for the kids. And in my education, that is the thing that I knew to focus on was the kids. So this is personally, honestly, probably my own fault. Like I'll talk about something a little bit later about the sense of like vulnerability that kind of generates some trust. But it's this idea of I just genuinely wanted to keep doing what was right for the kids. And I did not want to fall prey to like this devaluing, this distrust that was coming at me from different teachers. I remember I switched jobs my second year of teaching into more of like an interventionist position, and in that I was needing to like pop into classrooms. They were like, hey, this position hasn't existed in the school before, good luck in creating it. So there was trust given to me in that capacity. However, when, we got like a couple months into the school year, I was like, hey, I'm going to go do these things. I'm going to go pop into these classrooms. I'm going to create these materials. I'm going to do a professional development. I'm going to lead all these things that tells people like what my job is about. And a couple of teachers complained to admin that I like wasn't doing my job, that I like wasn't, you know, actively in their classrooms when I said I would be, or I wasn't doing the worksheets correctly, or and in all of that, right? It's the sense of immediate distrust between me and that teacher, where it's like, now I don't want to fucking talk to you. I don't want to fucking work with you. Like I don't even want to deal with that shit anymore, right? Like those teachers immediately inspired within me like a sense of distrust towards that system, where it's like, okay, well, now you're putting me in a place where I cannot do the best work I can for kids, right? And it's that idea of trust. It's you didn't trust me to like actively work towards doing my job in a position that made it very challenging to do so. Another thing early on was the string cheese incident. And if you know, you know. I'm going to take a second to explain it because this is a story that honestly should have been one of my very early red flags in my career. I think this was my fourth, maybe latest. It was my fourth year of teaching. I often had a lot of kids in my room during lunch. Early on, when I, was a teacher, kids would come in during lunch just to like hang out and eat their lunch in there because, like I said, it was like I very much created like a space for kids to like come and exist in, right? And sometimes early on, I realize now, like, it got a little out of hand. Like, there was, like, probably upwards of, like, 30 something kids in my room at a time, and nobody told me not to do it. So I just assumed that, like, oh, it's fine. Like, don't matter. It doesn't matter. And I eventually decided to make the change without anybody else's influence. I would add that I eventually, like, decided to make the change. It says, like, hey, this is probably not the best situation, right? So I created, like, a system that, like, made it a little bit more manageable. That to say, there was one day this year, not this year, but that year that I was talking about, where there's probably like 15 kids, like a lighter day, right? Just like hanging out. And I personally was just like kind of working on some stuff like I usually do. I was just like working on stuff in the back, like chatting with students here and there. And I noticed that like some kids in the back were kind of like messing around with something. And I was like, hey guys, like what's going on? What's happening? What are you doing? Absolutely not. And they were like, oh, nothing, don't worry, don't worry. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like I'll deal with it later if they stop. So I kind of moved on. And I was, already overstimulated. Like as a teacher, you get overstimulated like really quickly. So I remembered that moment and just being like, oh, I'll probably check in with them if anything happens, blah, 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 blah. And the next day, I walk into the classroom and I'm like having class and it's like, like we're just doing our lessons, we're doing our activities, whatever. A kid comes up to me and she's like, Mr. Kassick, like the stapler's not working. And I was like, okay, like let's fix it. Like, let's do it. And every kid's asking you a question. So like when a kid comes up and is like, oh, the stapler's not working. And I was like, are you like, can you not do this by yourself? Can you not figure this out by yourself? But I take the stapler and I'm like, oh, it's probably out of staples. I open it. There's a piece of string cheese in the stapler. There's a piece of string cheese in the stapler. Let me say it for a third time. There's a piece of string cheese in the stapler. And I immediately flash back to the day before where those boys in my room during lunch were like giggling and like screwing around by the bookshelf where the stapler was. And I was like, they got me. I was like, okay, you guys, that's funny. Like you put cheese in the stapler. Like that's hilarious. Like I was not even mad. I literally laughed. I literally laughed out loud and I was like, oh my God, it's not working because there's cheese in it. You guys, that's crazy. So I laughed, I giggled, I moved on. I fixed the stapler, moved the cheese, like threw it away. Right. And the 1 or 2 days later, okay, I kind of told the kids that were in my room during lunch. They came back in and I was like, hey, I found the string cheese that you put in my stapler. And there's like, oh, you weren't mad? And I was like, no, that's kind of funny. Like, you got me. Like, honestly, way to go. That's a good one. A harmless little prank, right? And 1 or 2 days later, we're reading a book as a class and I like let the kids choose like, hey, I can either read it aloud to you, you can read by yourself, read in little partners. So everyone had like their own little like station kind of going. And there was a group of kids that I was like, hey, I'll read to you guys. Like you guys wanted to be read to, like it's a little bit easier. Come sit with me on the floor over here. Like and we made our way over there. One kid, it was a lot of chaos, like with stations and like, routines like that. It does get a little chaotic when they're initially settling into it. So I remember like being really frustrated at the time because like things weren't moving. And I was like, yeah, like come over guys, like let's get it going. Like, what are we doing? A kid crawled under the table to like come sit on the rug, which was fine, typical seventh grade behavior. And he was like, Mr. Kassick, like there's cheese under the table. And I was like, you need to come over to read. Like, I don't care what kind of joke you're trying to do right now. Cause he's like a silly, goofy kid. And I almost lost it. And I was like, bro, like, no, I don't care. Like you're joking. Like we need to move on. He's like, no, Kassick, like I'm not joking. Like this is serious. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean there's cheese under the table? So I crawl underneath the table in my seventh grade classroom. All these other kids are waiting for me to read. And, everyone's starting to like hear what's going on. I crawl under the table, look at this piece of cheese. It is taped underneath my desk. And this was from fucking day, 3 fucking days prior, earlier in that week, right? And I look at it, I chuckle a little bit because I'm like, damn, they got me again. They got me again. I looked at it and I was like, absolutely not. And I said, let's ignore the cheese. Let's do some reading, please. My heart is like taking me back, like right to this moment. It's like, we need to do some reading. We'll deal with the cheese later. So I knew exactly who it was. I called them in during lunch and I said, guys, I need to talk to you. This was all the boys that were like screwing around on that first day. It was like 5 or 6 of them. I looked at them and I said, I need to talk to you. Come sit over here. I'm very frustrated. And they knew I was frustrated because I do this thing with my voice. It's the quiet, it's the calm, it's the pausing after each syllable that really gets kids to know. Like, that's my teacher strat. It's like they know I'm frustrated when I start talking like this, right? So I pull them over and I'm like, what's happening? You got me with the stapler. It was funny. Underneath my table is just purely disrespectful. Like, what were you thinking? What's going on? I have, there were 6 of them. I had 6 write ups all planned out about, like, classroom destruction, basically, like, whatever blocks they made you circle. And I wrote down all the things. I was like, this kid, this kid, this kid, this kid, this kid, all of them had a part in it, right? And I was like, there's 6 of them right here. Like, I'm going to give you all detentions. Like, it's not that serious. Just a detention, just one little punishment. Like, just to say, like, yeah, I did it. Like, funny, you got me. You pranked me. Like, I was laughing part of this conversation too, because I was like, hey, like, it's funny. Like, I get it. Like, I totally get what you were trying to do. Like, it's funny, right? Harmless prank. However, it's not harmless because it caused a distraction in my class, caused a distraction, with me, because I had to like clean my classroom. Like, I had to like de-cheese my classroom, right? So they would not admit to like who it was. They would not. I kind of told them, I was like, hey, I can only write up one of you, or I can write up 6 of you. Like, that's where we're at. Like, I can give it attention to one of you or 6 of you. And none of them would snitch on the other. I respect the game there, right? Respect the loyalty, respect the trust that they are giving each other. Let that sit for a second. The kids are trusting each other, right? Hold on to that for a sec. And they weren't giving me anything. It was halfway through lunch. I was like, fine, you know what? Get out. Like, you're not in my room until we figure this out then. Whatever. I'm writing all 6 of you up. They were pissed at me for a while, rightfully so. And I kind of moved on. I was like, shit, like, that was hard. Like, my early on in my career, like, it was really hard for me to write up kids, right? Like, just like that process, it gets easier. Like, it gets a lot easier as you go, but it's like that like authoritarian kind of like punishment centered thing has never really been my vibe. I'm more of a like sit down, talk, restorative justice kind of guy than I am like a, derisive punishment. So when I decided to do that, it was a big deal. Like, 6 people at a time was the most in my teaching career that I had ever written up at once, right? And I take them I put them in the box, whatever, and I'm frustrated the rest of the day. And I kind of go home and kind of like ruminate on it, kind of breathe about it, move on. And then the next day, like very early on in the day, I get an email from the assistant principal, and he says, "Hey, do you have a second to chat about the cheese incident?" That's where that's where it got its name. That was supposed to be like a cute, funny, silly, goofy moment, but I screwed it up because I stuttered. Anyway, that's where it got its name. He emails me and he said, "Do you have a minute to talk about the cheese incident?" And I was like, fuck. Okay, fine. It's like when your principal says, like, "Hey, see me after school." It's that kind of shit. That anxiety, that distrust, right? Immediately, just to not go there, right? So I go to his office whenever I can. I sit him down and he's like, "Hey, so I just got off the phone with like a parent not too long ago about like the cheese incident. Can you like explain it to me?" So I told him that whole story. I told him the exact like word for word story. And he was like, "Yeah, well, a parent called and he's like really pissed that like, you know, his kid got in trouble and he didn't do anything." And I was like, okay, well, my classroom has cheese all over it, ample disrespect from children, and I had a conversation with them. Like, I have done everything in my power to do so. And he's like, but like, he said whatever the fuck he said, and then he was like, yeah, so in the future, just like run stuff by me before you like make this decision in your classroom, because now these detentions like don't work and I have to deal with this parent. So we're vetoing all the detentions, and that's it. And I left that meeting so frustrated. To this day, one of the most frustrating things, actually, probably doesn't even make the top 10, let's be real, about the way that I was treated at kind of like with that administrative level, with the level of trust there, right? Like, when we're talking about trust, one, you trust me to make the decisions I need to make in my classroom because the fact I was there, but this man trusted a family member of a student, a dad, because he went in and complained, did not have my back, did not trust me in my decision, and did not trust the fact that like if they wouldn't have deserved it, I wouldn't have done it. Right? Because of the fact that I was early on. He does not know how hard it is for me to write kids up. He does not know that I had a conversation with them. He does not know the situation in my room like at all. It's just that lack of trust that really was the underpinnings to this situation. So, that was like a 10-minute story to in the midst of like what I was explaining about like my personal experiences with trust, but that's where it started, right? And I feel like from that moment, it has been impossible for me to like witness that trust again, right? So, as we are moving like forward throughout my career, I again like switched jobs around my fourth and fifth year to teach like a more social emotional based class. And they trusted me to create the curriculum, but then the second that it wasn't something that they wanted or whatever, they would tell me otherwise. And I would be like, okay, like what are we doing here? And it's in little moments like that. It's moments like the cheese incident. It's moments like, teach this whole class, or basically you don't have a job, and then like trusting me to do that, but also forcing to trust me to do that because they didn't want to fire me because they'd never fire anyone, right? Which, throughout the years, there was a lot of conversations like that. And I think the biggest moment of kind of distrust comes a little bit later. It was in probably my eighth year of teaching. There was a situation on social media where a student had like messaged me something wasn't super appropriate, and I didn't respond in the correct way. I responded with a few emojis as opposed to saying like, hey, like maybe don't contact me on social media, maybe don't send me shit like this, right? I didn't respond in the best way. Like looking at it, I can see why that might be an issue, right? It's just a video. Some kid sent me like a video, and it just had like a car on it with like a caption, and basically they admin got news of it and they called me into the office. They wrote me up for it and they were like, hey, explain this to me. And I was like, I don't know what you think it is. Like, I did not do anything wrong. There is nothing here to be like, you know, iffy about. There is nothing here that you need to worry about. Like the fact that I walked into that conversation hoping to have an actual conversation with adults about like, hey, like, yeah, no, it's like kind of a stupid situation. Like a kid sent me something, should have responded, should have told him. I told him in person in my classroom when he was there for lunch. I was like, bro, you can't send me shit like that. Like you can't send me stuff like that on Instagram. Like it just does not work, right? And sure, there were some like boundaries that are arguable that I could have fixed or done better with, right? But like that's not the point here. The point here is that like they called me to my office to have a conversation with the disciplinary write-up like already in their hands, already written. Is the problem that I have with it, right? Because they didn't take the time to know me enough to know that God, I would never just, in any of my wildest dreams disrespect a kid or their family. Like I just never fucking would. But the fact that they didn't know me enough, they didn't trust me enough as an educator, as a person, they didn't trust me enough as a person to fucking believe that that is just something that I take very seriously, right? Like the relationships I have with students and like the trust that I have in those relationships with students is they didn't know that. I even told them like early in that conversation, I was like, hey, yeah, no, I told him like in person that like he shouldn't send me stuff like that, right? And they were like, oh, will he corroborate that? Like they said that exact thing. And I was like, what the fuck do you mean? Like I am saying it as an educator that that hopefully you trust, that hopefully you understand like the vibe I create in my room at this point is one of trust and safety, and I would never defile that. And they're like, yeah, we'll talk to him. And that was a day before my birthday, by the way. Anyway, and that was just something that still to this day like strikes me as something that it's like, oh shit, like what could I possibly have done wrong? Like the kid doesn't have an issue with it. I've talked to other adults about it and they kind of understand, right? And it's the fact that it comes down to this idea of trust. It's they didn't care to know me enough as a person and as an educator to go and trust me to make the best decisions I can for kids, right? I'm hoping that if you've made it to episode 12 of this podcast, you understand like where I come from in education and what I care about, and what, if you're on my TikTok like at all, if you've seen me in any capacity as an educator in the realm that I'm being very vulnerable and real about all of these things, right? It's it's not something that I take lightly, is student safety and student trust, right? So when that happened, literally destroyed me for a very long time. The rest of that year, I think it was in that moment that I was like, I should fucking quit. Actually, maybe that was my seventh year, but I was like, yeah, no, I need to fucking quit. Like, no way that they just pulled me into their office to have a conversation about this with the write up already in hand. It's one thing to have a conversation with me, tell me like, hey, like maybe don't do fucking stupid shit like that, and then write me up, but to have it already ready, to not even have had a conversation with me about it, and then to play it like it's obvious that this should happen, like it's just that thing of distrust, right? That comes down the pipeline because of the fact that I sat in my room and did my job most of the time. I was focused on yearbook, I was coaching, I was doing speech and debate. Like, there was no time for me to not be working. And the fact that I created all of those things, there are episodes and episodes about the shit that I did for that school and the work that I put into that school and the value that I gave to the students and the community and all those different extracurriculars that I was involved in. Like, there are podcasts and hours of content at this point talking about how much I gave to that school because I wanted to, not because my fucking job told me to, but because I wanted to go in and create opportunities for kids that created spaces for them to exist safely and to exist confidently and to exist productively, right? Like, the fact that my seventh year of teaching, I was doing 8 of those jobs for the school, and for them to then look at me in the face and just actively disrespect and dishonor and disvalue all of that because they don't trust me, right? And that's what it came down to in that moment. I literally looked at them and I was like, okay, so how do I fix this? Right? How do I then go from this person that you believe I am, and how do I get you to trust me? And I've had that conversation with that administration previously, 2 years prior when I switched jobs. As I was mentioning, I went to them and said, I'm not feeling valued here. How do I get some value? How do I walk into this building and feel valued by the people I work for and work with? Because I have not felt that since day fucking one of this job. There are like 2 moments I can point to in that entire span of existence at that school that I felt respected and valued by another professional in that building. Respected and valued by kids, very different, right? I felt that every single day I walked into that building. I did not feel the value, the trust, and the respect that I deserved as a professional by other professionals in that building since day one. I can point to 2 moments in my career. We'll not share those because that's not the point right here, right? The point is, it's that kind of amount of distrust that I actively asked to get early on in my career. Like I said, year 4 or 5, I walked in and said, I'm not feeling valued. What do I do? How do I get other teachers to view me properly? This is probably after the teacher yelled at me in the hallway for making a pizza party. I don't want to get into that story too. Actually, you know what? Fuck it. Let's do it. It was during COVID. We were all like in cohorts because, like, we couldn't cross mingle or cross contaminate with people. So we went into the school day with our masks on, and we were in cohorts. We were very, disseminated. I had a cart I was pushing around all my different classes. At the time, I was teaching literally 16 different sections of classes because of the way the cohorts broke up in my new job there. It was 16 different sections. I was moving my cart around between like block A days, block B days, things like that. And I worked with yearbook kids, and I had a couple of kids in my room during lunch that were of the same cohort. So, my little office across the hall became like a safe space very quickly, where those 4 kids would come over during lunch. We had like a little lunch squad, and it was a thing that I okayed with people that are like, yeah, if they're in the same cohort, like they can pop over, like it's fine. I asked admin, I did all the shit that I was supposed to do. One day they get word that a kid is like, buying pizza. And I was like, okay, like that's fine. You can bring the pizza into my room. Like, I don't care, because, it was whatever celebration. I don't remember what the fuck it was the pizza for. But so another cohort, however, got word of it, and they were like, yeah, we're going over to Kassick's office for lunch. And like, this was while I was teaching. All these things like spiraled out of control. And these kids all of a sudden had this idea that there was a pizza party happening in my room between the 1 hour and the 5 minutes in the morning I was talking to this kid about ordering pizza, and then the 5 hours later where lunch was happening, where all of a sudden there's a pizza party in my room. So one of the teachers marches down the hallway. She comes down to me and she's like, what's going on? And I was like, no, what do you mean? And she's like, there's a pizza party in here. Like, what's that about? Like, she was like so frustrated. And I was like, I don't like, it was just a few kids. Like, they always have lunch in here. And she's like, no, well, there's like five other kids that are coming in here and expecting pizza because they like paid for it. They asked their teachers if they could be here, all these things. And I was like, okay, like I don't know the situation that well. I did okay for some kids to come in here and eat pizza, but I will, if we need to go outside to have the pizza COVID friendly, like we can. Like it's honestly not that serious. Like it's 10 eighth graders, maybe, that are coming in to eat pizza in an office for lunch. Like, let them have some joy in this, like, very tumultuous time. In the middle of that conversation, a teacher pops her head out into the hallway and she's like, oh my God, I forgot to make copies. Can anyone, like, go get make copies? And she looks right at me and I was like, fuck yeah, I'll go make copies. Like, I'll go make copies. And then the teacher who was actively having a conversation with me about the pizza party, she's like, this is so frustrating. And she marches down the hallway, runs to get the nurse. The nurse, I cross paths with the nurse like coming back to get copies, and she's like, "Hey, what's going on?" Like, I'm running to like their kids like cross mingling. Like, we can't have that. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I didn't know the situation. We were gonna go outside if it like became a thing that like needed to be an issue. I'm going to make copies for this teacher right now because of the fact that it's like she's struggling. She needs a class to start. I am marching down this hallway to make sure that everything happens the way that it needs to. I'll go deal with the pizza situation when I get there. And the teacher who snitched on me, for lack of better words, she yells at me in the middle of the hallway and says, this is so frustrating. I want to do fun things too. Why does he get to do things? This is not okay. I am so frustrated at you for this situation, for creating this situation. And 4 or 5 years into my teaching profession is I am being yelled at, scolded by a teacher in the hallway, in front of another class, in front of other teachers, in front of other professionals, where I had the situation handled to the best of my ability at the time. And I was still scolded. I was still yelled at. I was still emailed by the principal that says, like, hey, can you explain this? Sent him a nasty email. And I even apologized in some capacities in there. And I said, hey, thanks for letting me make mistakes. I remember the fucking email that I sent that I said, thanks for letting me make mistakes. I had a conversation with that teacher to no avail. She was pissed about 8,000 other things that I was doing in my interventionist role. She's like, why are you helping these kids when all these other kids need help? And I was like, girl, I'm doing like I'm doing the best that I know how. Like, why can't you trust that fact? Right? Like it's things like that. It was after that pizza party situation where I then went to admin within that next year, within that next month, within that whatever. I was like, situations like this keep happening to me. Teachers accuse me of cheating for their kids on their intervention tests. People accuse me of working with not the correct children or not doing the right things that they're expected of me. Or, I'm doing things that are too fun and like we shouldn't be allowed to do, and not trusting the fact that I, as a professional, have all of those things handled. I am not cheating for students. I am not doing the work for them. I am not actively trying to give students special treatment based on whatever. I am not actively trying to make your teaching job more difficult. I am not actively trying to spread COVID throughout the school. I am not actively trying to do those things. And I have had situations with probably 15, 20 teachers in that building throughout my tenure, my tenure there, that added up to this just disgust, this distrust, this disgustful distrust, there we go, of my ability to do my job and exist in my job and do what is right for kids, because they had their own idea and they thought that they could push that on me, right? Like, at what point is it not okay for you to distrust me because I am not doing the thing you want me to do? This leads me into like my last year, and I guess this is kind of the story of like why I quit my job, right? They, you know, pulled me into their office again. They had a conversation and they were like, "Hey, you're doing all these things still that we have asked you to stop doing. We've asked you to stop having kids in your room during lunch. We've asked you to like stop letting kids TAs be in there when they're not supposed to be. We, have asked you not to give out snacks to kids. Like, we have asked you to do these things and you keep doing them. Like, what the fuck is going on?" Was the background of the conversation. And I was sitting there in that meeting and just saying like, you don't trust me. Like, you don't trust me to do my job. And I said in that meeting, I was like, since the day I started here, I have been like the black sheep of the school, right? Like, nobody actively tries to seek me out. Nobody actively tries to work with me. Nobody believes that I'm doing the right thing for kids. My room is an enigma in this. There's a couch in there. There's lights. There's fun energy. Like, kids enjoy being in my room. And you're going to sit here and tell me that you want me to shift all of that because of the fact that it's not the thing that you want? Like, at what point do I value your trust in me for becoming what you want me to be, or the trust that I have in myself as an educator? And that's literally what this conversation came down to. Is it's like, did I want to become the teacher they were trying to make me be? Absolutely not. And it's, why would you want to make me into this certain version of a teacher that I'm just never going to be? Why would you trust me to make, why do you not trust me to make the professional and personal choices I need to feel successful in the profession? Why do you not trust that I have the students and the school's best interests at heart? Why is your trust contingent on me fitting into your mold? And that is when I looked at them, told them very similar things in that final meeting. And I said, I don't want to be here anymore because I can exist in a space where I am actively being watched, actively being distrusted because you don't believe that I have the best interests of the community at heart, right? And I think there are more nuances to that story that someday I'll probably get into, but what this all comes down to, and the reason I want to do a fucking episode about it. And like I said, I've talked for an hour already. See, I knew I was going to just get on here and start yapping because I get so fired up about this shit because I unfortunately do take it to a personal level a lot, right? Um, I always say, and this is a prerequisite to like the next part of the conversation, I suppose. But when I got diagnosed with autism in November 2023, it was my last year. My last year at that school was 23, 24. I got diagnosed in November 2023. I only told a few people, like, because I don't appreciate labels, right? Like, I don't really like labels, like, in my own life for a million different capacities, because I feel like it gives people power over me that they don't deserve to have. Like, oh yeah, you're autistic, or oh yeah, you're a ginger. Like, even shit like that. It's like, you don't fucking know me, bro. Like, I'm not gonna give you this label that allows you to then have power over you thinking you understand me or you know me, right? So, but the reason I talk about that is because for so long, like my entire professional career, like the first, 7 years of my profession, I had no semblance of the fact or the proof, right? Like I had whispers, I had like ideas that I might have some sort of autism, right? But when I got diagnosed, I literally like did an immediate reflection. I was like, holy shit, everything kind of makes sense now, right? And when I was sitting in that meeting, I was realizing all the moments before of like me trying to fit into this mold and me trying to like get trust. And I realized like it might have been a me issue, right? But I was sitting there in that last meeting, when I decided to quit the job that I was working at for a while, is I was thinking about it and I was like, I'm never gonna be able to understand what they're trying to get me to do because I have done everything that I possibly can to make sure that I am trusted and valued here. And if I didn't get, basically what this comes down to is like, if I didn't get the diagnosis of my autism that year, I feel like I would have done the shit that I needed to do to fit and stay at that job, solely because of the fact that I thought that's what everyone has gone through. Like, I thought that maybe it was me, right? This is where it comes to like the blaming me part. It's like, shit, like maybe I am doing things wrong. Like maybe I am like not matching, or maybe I am just like very consistently disconnected or something like that, right? It comes down to the fact that like their distrust in me as like a person and as an individual was never going to be able to be satisfied because I had grown so much from my first year, like, with the string cheese incident to the pizza party incident to the active amounts of distrust throughout that. I had grown so much as a person. It's like, I know what I need to do as an educator for these kids, and we are never going to see eye to eye. I am now understanding more about myself personally that it's like, we're never going to see eye to eye on this, and you're never going to get to my level to trust me. And it was literally in that moment when all of that stuff started coming together, like bird's eye view, sitting in that office. And I was like, what do I have to do to not come back anymore? So I think when we're talking about distrust, I do kind of put a lot of pressure on myself now. I talked about it earlier, this like sense of vulnerability, right? And I was told by an admin early on, when I still respected him, that he was like, if you want people to trust you, like you have to get them, you have to let them know you, like you have to be vulnerable. Vulnerability comes in like people getting to know you. And I kind of eventually began to realize that personally, I just like jar things up so much. I retreat into my profession. I work really hard to do the job that I need to do in the way that I know how to do it the best, and I forget about all these other things, right? Like the social aspects of being in education, the vulnerable aspects of like going to the teacher's lounge and actively trying to get them to talk to you, right? I think that is something in education that in as I was literally developing from being 21 to now being 30 years old, and that's how long I was at that job, from when I was 21 to when I was 30 years old. And just like the natural development that happens, kind of understanding how much my brain was actively changing and understanding what I was going through at the time, and that social limitation that barred me off from like having that trust with people, right? Because there are people in that building that were in that building far too long. There are people in that building that were active predators that the school knew about and did not do shit about for probably 2 or 3 years, because they had to they had to tell him again to stop doing these things to people. And he still worked at that school. He was never officially fired. An active predator that students knew about, that admin knew about, that they never fucking did anything about. And what can I chalk that up to other than distrust? Because they trusted an active predator to stay at that school more than they trusted me, who was actively working to make the school better, who was actively creating spaces for students to be in, who was actively working to make education itself like the core of everything that I needed to do and wanted to do, right? And maybe that's a story for another day. Maybe I've said enough. Maybe I've said too much. But the idea is, while I take a lot of this and say, like, hey, you could have gone and showed people who you are, like, you could have gone and done all of these things, because the fact that they didn't know you is what leads to their distrust in you. Like, I look at the people in that job at that school that like did know me, and the 4 or 5 of them at the time that like truly knew who I was as a teacher and as a person, they're like, what the fuck? Like, what do you mean? And I was like, girl, I know. Like, trust me, it's it's as introspective as it is, while also I understand that it's not me, right? Because at the end of the day, what I always take from this is, it's like they should have trusted me. Like, they should have taken the time to come and get to know me, right? Like, what kind of community are you creating where there's someone down the hall that you barely know? Like, when I was leaving, like, there's a professional development we went to down in, the city's like an hour and a half away, in my fourth year of teaching, where I was going with a bunch of administrators at the time, and, the dean and all these different high up people in the school. And I was kind of off as far as socially in that group. Like, I was just a teacher, and they're like, you need to come to this training. And I was like, okay, yeah, it'll help with my class, like whatever. I'm sitting in the back, and they're like, oh, like, Josh, like, what's going on? I was like, I don't know. And they're like, we just start talking, and eventually, we start talking about like things we're afraid of, and we start talking about all these different like very vulnerable things. And they got to know me in that moment, but that didn't last, right? But the reason I brought that up is because the last day, my, boss, the higher up, he had my goodbye speech to the school, because I fucking showed up. As hell I showed up to that last day of school, mostly out of spite, just to say, like, you're not gonna fucking put me out to pasture like that, bro. The one thing that he knew about me, is he was like, the one thing I know about Kassick is that he's afraid of turtles. And every time I look at him, I think about that. And that was from a conversation we had in my fourth year of teaching, because we were stuck in a car for a few days out of the year for an hour and a half. That is the conversation that he remembers about me, right? And we come back to this issue as a whole, this institutional knowledge, this institutional distrust of educators, because of the fact that these higher ups are now not taking the time it takes to get to know their teachers, to support them, to actively work towards building trusting relationships, that is where the system begins to crumble. Because if the administrator that you work directly under does not know you enough to then trust you in the choices and the decisions you're making and the things you're doing in your classroom, how is his boss going to trust you to do that? How is society going to trust you to do that? How is the federal government, who's now taking away certain protections, going to trust an educator to do the job they need to do if the person directly in their supervision, if the person directly above them in supervision does not trust them, does not know them, cannot back them up in any capacity because they are just following what they believe to be are the rules? And I I guess that's like all I don't it feels like a weird spot to just like stop talking because I was really building up to something there. But I obviously have a lot to say about this idea and how important it is to just as people trust your teachers, because I feel like I'm not the only one in this situation where the active sense of distrust literally from day one in that job just led to me burning out. And the fact that I'm still in education, the fact that I'm still actively working towards doing these things, the fact that I'm still actively trying to make the the difference, a difference, any sort of difference in anyone's experiences in the world. And I do not really have a whole lot of reason to stay in education. And here I am, bro, because I believe that I trust myself in the decisions I'm making. I trust what I have done for people. I trust myself in those decisions and those choices and those moments, right, where other people did not. And that's what it has to come down to. But it's what, each teacher against the world. At what point is that not enough? You know? So, with that, thank you guys so much for listening. This is a long episode. I kind of assumed it would get this long because I knew what I was going to talk about. I just didn't know that I would. There's some real highs and lows. There's some real highs and lows of this episode. So, if nothing else, please leave a comment, leave a review at this point. I'd love to talk more about this issue because I feel like I cannot be the only one here. This is a very controversial issue. I can feel it already in my jellies. So leave a message, leave a comment, leave a review. Follow me on all the socials. It's at Kassick's Corner on everything. Thanks so much for listening. I'm super proud of you, and I will see you in the next one.